So good, so good, so good.
Everything you want for summer is at Nordstrom Rack stores now, and up to 60% off. Stock up and save on the brands you love like Vince, Sam Edelman, Frame, and Free People. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
Goodrich Castle stands on the River Wye, as though it has grown out of the rock itself. Even in ruin, it dominates the valley, the red sandstone walls rising above the trees and looking out across one of the oldest crossing points on the Welsh border.
You said this place was steps from the water.
We just haven't found the steps yet.
How much did we save?
Enough.
Enough to get lost?
Or you could book a stay with Hilton.
Welcome to your oceanfront room, just steps from the water.
The Hilton sale is on now. Book on Hilton.com or the Hilton app and save up to 20% to get the stay you expected. When you want savings, not surprises, it matters where you stay. Hilton, for the stay.
The river curves below the castle in a broad loop through the Herefordshire countryside. Moving quietly now, though for centuries this was a contested landscape where movement through the valley mattered. The castle stands a few miles south of Ross-on-Wye, close to the old route between England and Wales. Long before the present ruins appeared, this ridge above the river was important because it controlled movement through the valley. The nearby crossing point at Walford connected routes running deep into the Welsh marches, while the remains of an old Roman road still passed through the landscape nearby. Anyone holding the ridge controlled the crossing, and throughout the medieval period, the borderlands between England and Wales were unstable places where authority was constantly challenged. The earliest castle here appears to have been established shortly after the Norman Conquest. By the beginning of the 12th century, the site was already known as Goodrich's Castle, probably named after Godric of Mapstone, an Anglo-Saxon landowner mentioned in the Domesday Book. The first fortification was likely little more than earthbanks and timber palisades, built quickly to secure the crossing and establish Norman control across the region. Nothing visible survives from the earliest structure now, but archaeology beneath the later masonry suggests how the original earthworks may once have enclosed the sandstone ridge. The location itself was the true defence. The outcrop rises steeply above the valley floor, with natural slopes protecting much of the site before a single wall was ever raised. Sometime during the troubled middle decades of the 12th century, the timber defences were replaced by stone. England at the time had descended into civil war during the conflict between King Stephen and the Empress Matilda. Across the country, castles became symbols of allegiance and military control, and the Welsh border remained especially dangerous. Raids continued from across the frontier, while rival noble families competed for influence throughout the marches. The surviving Norman keep at Goodrich dates from this period. It is a stark structure even now. The walls are massively thick, the internal chambers narrow and defensive, and the original entrance was positioned high above ground level for protection. Though later generations transformed Goodrich into a sophisticated medieval residence, the keep still belongs to an earlier world of insecurity and warfare. Responsibility for building it remains uncertain. Historians have variously attributed it to Padawan of Monmouth, Richard de Clare, or possibly royal authority itself. Richard de Clare, later known as Strongbow, inherited the castle during the mid-12th century and would go on to become famous for his campaigns in Ireland. Whoever commissioned the tower, the surviving structure reflects the changing nature of Norman power along the borderlands, During the reign of King John, Goodrich passed into the hands of William Marshall, Earl of Pembroke. Marshall was one of the most respected knights of medieval England, a man whose rise from relatively modest origins carried him into the highest levels of royal government. He served several kings and became Regent of England during the minority of Henry III. Under Marshall, Goodrich expanded significantly. Stone curtain walls and defensive towers were added around the original keep, strengthening the castle against Welsh attack. The border remained volatile throughout this period. One account describes Marshall leaving the coronation feast of the young Henry III at Gloucester after receiving news that Goodrich required reinforcement against a Welsh assault. Whether embellished or not, the story reflects the reality of the region. Even major political ceremonies at the centre of the kingdom could be interrupted by violence along the marches. The castle passed through Marshall's sons before eventually transferring through inheritance and marriage to William de Valence, half-brother of Henry III. Under the de Valence family, during the late 13th century, Goodrich underwent its most dramatic transformation. Much of what survives today dates from this period. Earlier fortifications were demolished or absorbed into a new concentric castle built from red sandstone quarried locally. The pale Norman keep became enclosed within high curtain walls, protected by circular towers, with large projecting spurs at their bases designed to resist undermining attacks. Deep ditches were cut directly into the sandstone along the vulnerable southern approaches, exploiting natural fissures in the rock itself. The gatehouse reflected the latest military thinking of the age. Portcullises, murder holes, and a drawbridge protected the entrance passage, while beyond it, a large barbican defended the approach causeway. Architectural historians have long noted similarities between parts of Goodrich and contemporary royal castles in Wales, built during the reign of Edward I. Yet Goodrich was never intended solely for war. Archaeologically, what makes the castle particularly interesting is the integration of military strength with aristocratic domestic life. The Great Hall overlooked the River Wye through broad windows, while remaining heavily defended. Kitchens, buttery rooms, private chambers, chapels, garderobes, and servant accommodation were all arranged carefully within its restricted space enclosed by the walls. The surviving accounts of Countess Joan de Valence during the late 13th century provide rare insight into how the castle functioned as a household, rather than simply a fortress. Her records describe large entourages staying at Goodrich, with servants, retainers, visiting nobles, cooks, clergy and labourers all moving constantly through the buildings. Hundreds of people might be present during major visits. Fires burned continually in the Great Hall. Horses filled the stables outside the walls, and supplies arrived regularly through the valley below. The castle evolved further under the Talbot family, who gained control during the 14th century after periods of political upheaval involving the Despencer family and the troubled reign of Edward II. Goodrich remained one of the Talbots' principal residences for generations. During the early 15th century, the Welsh rebellion of Owain Glyndwr again brought instability to the borderlands, and members of the Talbot family played important roles in defending the region. Architectural changes continued throughout this period. Additional upper chambers were built within the North Range. The chapel was modified. More accommodation appeared for servants and retainers. Like many castles, Goodrich slowly adapted from a military fortress into a noble household shaped increasingly around status and domestic life. By the 16th century, however, its importance had begun to decline. The Talbots owned larger and more fashionable residences elsewhere, and Goodrich gradually became too remote from the centres of political power. Parts of the castle continued in use as a judicial centre and prison, while local courts occasionally held prisoners within its walls, but much of the site slowly fell quiet. That changed abruptly during the English Civil War. By the 1640s, England had fractured into conflicts between Parliament and the Crown. The Welsh border countries became strategically important once again, and Goodrich was drawn back into warfare after generations of relative peace. Initially occupied for Parliament, the castle eventually came under royalist control beneath Sir Henry Lingen. The medieval wars, though centuries old, still formed a powerful defensive position. Royalist troops based at Goodrich carried out raids across the surrounding countryside, while parliamentarian forces attempted to isolate the remaining strongholds in the region. In 1646, Colonel John Birch returned to besiege the castle directly. Rather than attempting immediate assault, parliamentarian troops dug trenches and slowly tightened their grip around the fortress. Water pipes feeding the castle cisterns were damaged during bombardment, forcing the defenders to rely entirely upon the ancient well in the courtyard. When conventional artillery failed to force surrender, Birch commissioned an enormous mortar, locally forged and later known as Roaring Meg. The weapon fired explosive shells weighing close to 200 pounds. Contemporary accounts describe repeated bombardment against the northwest tower, while sappers undermined the foundations below the walls. The defenders attempted to dig a countermine beneath the parliamentarian tunnel system, but Birch advanced the mortar under cover of darkness and opened fire at close range. Eventually, part of the tower collapsed, burying the royalist countermine beneath tons of masonry. By then, the defenders had almost exhausted their gunpowder. Facing direct assault, they surrendered in July 1646. The siege effectively ended Goodrich as a functioning fortress. Parliament later ordered the castle to be slighted so it could never again be defended. Battlements were dismantled, key structures damaged, and sections of wall deliberately weakened. Though parts of the castle remained habitable for a short period afterwards, Goodrich slowly entered the long decline that created the ruin seen today. Strangely, it was this destruction that ensured its survival. By the 18th century, ruined castles had become fashionable destinations for travellers searching for picturesque scenery. Goodrich, standing above the wooded valley of the Wye, became one of the most admired ruins in the region. Artists painted the ivy-covered walls and broken towers. Writers and poets travelled through the valley, describing the atmosphere of the site. William Wordsworth later referred to Goodrich as the noblest ruin in Herefordshire. Victorian visitors arrived by riverboat and eventually by railway. Guides led them through the collapsing chambers and dangerous stairways, while ivy and wild growth covered much of the structure. Early conservation work during the 20th century stabilised the surviving masonry and uncovered evidence of earlier building phases hidden beneath later repairs. Today, Goodrich remains one of the finest preserved medieval ruins in England. Yet alongside the documented history, archaeology and architecture, the castle has also accumulated centuries of folklore. The best-known legend concerns two lovers said to have died during the final days of the Civil War siege. According to local tradition, Alice Birch, niece of the parliamentarian commander, fell in love with a royalist named Charles Clifford. Versions of the story differ slightly, depending on where it is recorded. but the central details remain consistent. As bombardment intensified and the situation inside the castle became increasingly desperate, the couple supposedly attempted escape beneath cover of darkness. The story places them riding on horseback down from the castle toward the River Wye. Heavy rain had swollen the river, and while attempting the crossing, the horse lost its footing. Both riders were swept away and drowned in the floodwater below the castle walls. There is no known contemporary Civil War source confirming the event, and historians generally regard the account as folklore rather than documented history. Even so, the story became firmly attached to Goodrich during the 19th and 20th centuries, and now appears repeatedly in local ghost literature. What is noticeable is the restrained nature of most reported sightings connected with the legend. The apparitions are rarely described as threatening. Instead, witnesses have claimed to see two figures riding a phantom horse toward the river during storms, or standing silently still along the ruined battlements overlooking the valley below. The river itself gives the story credibility. After prolonged rain, the Wye can rise quickly, and the steep muddy banks below the castle would have been dangerous in darkness. Standing above the crossing during storm weather, it becomes easy to understand how such a legend took hold locally. Some accounts add further details over time. A few describe cries supposedly heard near the river during bad weather. Others mention shadowy forms seen briefly in the floodwater itself. These later additions are difficult to trace reliably and appear mainly in modern paranormal retellings rather than old local histories, so they are best treated cautiously. Another legend associated with Goodrich concerns the Norman Keep, sometimes referred to as Macbeth Tower. The name appears in local folklore connected to stories of an imprisoned Irish chieftain, supposedly held within the lower chambers of the tower centuries ago. According to the tradition, the prisoner died while attempting escape, and now haunts the keep. The story itself is impossible to verify historically, but the association has persisted for many years. Visitors occasionally describe unusual experiences within the lower levels of the tower, particularly within the old dungeon chambers. Several modern paranormal groups investigating the castle have reported sudden temperature drops, unexplained haze appearing in photographs, or electronic equipment failing temporarily within the keep. In one published account, investigators photographing one another inside the dungeon later noticed a pale mist-like form visible across successive images, despite nothing unusual being seen at the time. None of these reports provide conclusive evidence of anything paranormal. Old stone chambers produce unusual acoustics, and environmental conditions, while photographic distortions in low light are common. Even some investigators involved in such experiences remain openly skeptical of their own conclusions. Still, the atmosphere within the keep is undeniably oppressive. The lower chambers absorb sound strangely, and daylight fades quickly beneath the thick Norman walls. The physical environment itself encourages imagination, particularly when visitors already know the stories attached to the site. There are smaller experiences too, usually passed quietly between visitors rather than formally documented. Some people describe hearing footsteps along empty wall walks, or briefly seeing figures in upper openings where access no longer exists. Others mention an uncomfortable feeling or standing within the Great Hall overlooking the river below. Most of these moments remain ambiguous. A shape mistaken for a person, a sound carried oddly through ruined stonework. a movement glimpsed only briefly before disappearing. They are the kind of experiences easily dismissed afterwards, yet somehow remembered long after the visit itself. And perhaps that is what gives Goodrich its atmosphere more than any individual ghost story. Not spectacle, not horror, but accumulation. Nearly 1,000 years of conflict, occupation, decline, memory and storytelling, layered upon the same ridge above the same river crossing. The castle has watched Norman expansion, medieval warfare, dynastic struggles, rebellion, civil war, abandonment, tourism, and preservation. Each generation has left something behind, whether in stone, record, or story. Even now, the relationship between the ruins and the surrounding landscape remains unusually strong. The river still moves beneath the walls, exactly as it did centuries ago. Mist still gathers across the valley in poor weather. The wind still moves through the broken towers and empty chambers. Standing there as evening approaches, with the river darkening below the ridge and the old walls beginning to lose detail in faded light, it becomes very easy to understand why some places continue to gather stories long after their original purpose has disappeared. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy these stories, you can support the podcast and get access to MP3s and PDF books over on Buy Me a Coffee. They're £1.50 each, or free if you're a member. You can find everything at ghosttales.co.uk and follow on Facebook and Instagram at Ghost Tales Podcast.
Girl, winter is so last season. And now spring's got you looking at pictures of tank tops with hungry eyes. Your algorithm is feeding you cutoffs. You're thirsty for the sun on your shoulders. That perfect hang on the patio sundress. Those sandals you can wear all day and all night. And you've had enough of shopping from your couch. Done hoping it looks anything like the picture when you tear open that envelope? It's time for a little in-person spring treat. It's time for a trip to Ross. Work your magic.